Medic's fingers scraped against coarse grass, and the sensation sent a jolt through his nervous system, not because it hurt, but because it resolved. Each pixelated edge, each perfect right angle of the block beneath his palm registered with clinical precision. Too perfect, too intentional. He pushed himself upright and the world swam. A sky the color of drowned blueberries, trees that grew in rigid columns, their leaves arranged in mathematical spheres, the sun, a burning square, crawling across a skybox that didn't quite reach the horizon. Where am I? The question surfaced and sank immediately, swallowed by a deeper current. He didn't know his mother's face. He couldn't recall his first word, his last meal, or whether he'd ever tasted whiskey. The vault of memory gaped empty, a ransacked room with only dust motes drifting in the light. But one thing remained. It wasn't a memory. It was gravity. A pull in his chest, south by southeast, tugging at his sternum like a fishhook buried deep. He pressed his palm flat against his ribs and felt his own heartbeat answering. Thump, 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 compass needle steady. Find it. Find the end of things. Find the dragon. The words weren't his, or maybe they were the only thing that was. Medic looked down at himself, bare chest, bare feet. His skin carried the faint tan of someone who'd worked under open skies, but his hands were uncalloused, smooth as newborn things. He flexed his fingers, blocky, ridiculous, 5 perfect cubes attached to a rectangular palm, and watched the joints articulate with mechanical precision. He was a construct. He knew it with the same certainty he knew his own hunger, which was to say, absolutely, and without understanding why. A pig wandered past, its legs pistoning in crude animation. It stopped, rotated its entire body to face him, and made a sound like a kazoo drowning. No fear in its button eyes. No anything. Medic's stomach growled, the gravity in his chest pulled harder. He started walking. The forest gave way to plains, and the plains to a desert where the sand stacked in impossible pillars. He punched a tree, not because he knew it would work, but because the need to do something had built to a pressure behind his eyes. His fist connected. The wood cracked. A cube of oak popped free, hovering in the air, waiting. He understood then. The rules of this place were simple and brutal. Reality was a negotiation between fist and matter, and he was losing badly. By sunset, when the square sun slid below the flat horizon and the stars emerged in their fixed constellations, Medic had crafted a crude wooden pick. His palms were splintered, his throat burned with thirst that no stream seemed to quench completely. The gravity never stopped pulling. He found coal in a hillside cave and managed, after several failures, to coax a torch into being fire here. Required no tinder, no patience, just a match that existed because he willed it, because the code allowed it. The implication should have terrified him. Instead, he felt only the pull, stronger now, a constant whisper, closer, closer, closer. On the 3rd day, he killed his first zombie. It came shambling from a dark crevice, arms outstretched, moaning in a looped sample of human suffering. Medic swung his stone sword, the blade he'd fashioned from cobblestone that shattered too easily, and reformed in his inventory with magical persistence, and felt the impact shudder up his arm. The zombie dissolved into smoke in a single lump of rotten flesh. Medic stood over the empty space, breathing hard. He should feel something, remorse, victory, anything. But the gravity had intensified, and now it sang, a high, thin note behind his eyes that drowned out all other music. He ate the rotten flesh because he had to. His stomach rebelled.
He vomited into a patch of poppies, watched the flowers bob in the acid rain of his body. Then he stood and walked on. Nights were the worst, when the spiders came, their red eyes glowing in the dark, and the skeletons rattled with their bows drawn, and the creepers, silent, patient, hungry, stalked his torchlight. Medic learned to dig a hole and pull dirt over his head, lying in the dark with the worms in the stone, listening to the world hunt above him. In those moments, in the compressed dark, fragments surfaced, not memories, something older. The smell of ozone before a storm, the weight of armor that wasn't leather and iron, but something lighter, something star-forged. A voice saying, "You will forget everything, but you will not forget the mission. The mission is the architecture of you." He woke each morning with dirt in his mouth, and the pull stronger than before.
On the seventh day, he found the stronghold. It announced itself with silverfish scuttling from cracked stone bricks, their bodies glitching through the floor in half-rendered frames. Medic crushed them underfoot, feeling nothing, and descended into the maze. The air grew cold. The torchlight shrank to a desperate orange sphere, and then the portal room. The frame stood incomplete, eyes of Ender missing from 3 sockets. The gravity here was a scream, a riptide, a mother's hand dragging him toward the edge of a cliff. Medic fell to his knees before the portal, gasping, and understood with perfect clarity that he had been made for this moment. Engineered the empty memories, the bare hands, the unrelenting drive, all of it leading here, to this frame of obsidian, to this threshold. He didn't know where to find the missing eyes. He didn't know how to activate what lay beyond. But as he pressed his forehead against the cold stone, the dragon spoke to him for the first time. Not words, not yet, just a presence. A consciousness vast enough to bend the frame of his own, looking back at him through the dark glass of the incomplete portal. "You're early," it said, and the voice was warm as a fever, gentle as a knife to the throat, or late time moves strangely for the architects. "Do you know what you are? Little broken thing." Medic's hands spasmed against the stone. The gravity had become something else now. Not a pull, but a binding, a cord drawn tight between his heart and whatever waited in the void. "Tell me," he whispered. But the presence retreated, laughing in frequencies that made his teeth ache. And Medic was left alone in the torchlight with his hunger and his hole where memories should live. He stood. He adjusted his grip on his stone sword, and he walked back into the maze, following the silverfish because they had to come from somewhere. And somewhere was where the eyes waited. And the eyes were the way to the end. The dragon's voice lingered not in his ears, but in the hollow of his missing self. "Hurry," it said. "I've been waiting so long to meet the last one." The eyes of Ender were heavier than stone. Medic held one in his palm, watching the green iris swirl beneath the surface like something trapped in amber. It had taken him 3 days of slaughter, 3 days of Endermen shrieking and teleporting and dropping their strange pearls, to craft 12 of them. 12 green eyes that wept when he squeezed them, that whispered in frequencies that made his fillings ache. Now he stood before the portal frame, and the gravity that had pulled him across plains and deserts and through the bowels of the earth had become something else entirely. A stillness, a held breath. He placed the first eye. The frame hummed a note so low it vibrated in his marrow. The air pressure dropped and his ears popped, and somewhere in the distance, though distance meant nothing here, he felt the dragon turn its attention toward him like a lighthouse beam sweeping across dark water. "So you came," it said, and the voice was different now. Not the playful warmth of before, but something exhausted, something ancient in a way that had nothing to do with years. "I wondered if you would." The others didn't, not all the way. They built kingdoms instead. They fell in love with the building. Medic placed the second eye. The hum became a chord. "How many?" he asked, his voice cracked. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken aloud. 17, the dragon said. 17 ancients before you. Some became farmers, some became kings. One built a railway that spanned 10,000 blocks just to see if he could outrun the pull. The pull doesn't outrun Medic. You know that now. The third eye, the fourth, the portal's interior began to change. The gray static resolving into a star field that hurt to look at directly. Not because it was bright, but because it was deep depths that suggested you could fall forever and never reach bottom. "I don't remember being anything," Medic said. "Before this, I don't remember choosing." "You didn't, neither did I." The eighth eye, the ninth, the dragon's voice grew clearer, closer, as if it was speaking from just behind his shoulder rather than across dimensions. "I was the first," it said. "The template the architects needed a warden for their prison, and I was young then. If you can call it youth when you're forged from void and code." And I thought. A pause, filled with the static of the forming portal. I thought it would be temporary. A cycle, guard the seven until they sleep, then rest, then die, perhaps, and join them in whatever comes after. The 11th eye, the 12th, the portal screamed open. Medic stood at the threshold of a dimension that shouldn't exist. The end islands of pale stone floating in an endless void. The star field below and above and through everything. As if the world were made of glass and the universe looked back from both sides. And at the center, perched on a pillar of obsidian, coiled around its crystal heart, the dragon turned its head. It was smaller than he'd imagined. Or perhaps size meant nothing here. And it was simultaneously the length of a train and the size of a house cat. And both observations were true. Its scales were the color of bruised twilight, of old television static, of the moment before sleep when dreams leak through. Two eyes, pupilless, the white of old bone, fixed on him with an expression he couldn't read. "Come closer," it said, and the voice was no longer in his mind alone, but in the air, vibrating the obsidian beneath his feet. "I won't attack. What's the point? You've already won." Medic stepped through. The transition felt like dying and being born in the same instant. Gravity reasserted itself. Wrong, too light, too directionless, and he stumbled, catching himself on stone that felt like frozen meat. The air tasted of copper and ozone and something sweeter, incense perhaps, or funeral flowers. He walked across the bridge of stone, and the dragon watched him come. It didn't move, its wings, tattered membranes stretched between fingers of obsidian, remained folded, its tail, barbed with crystals that pulsed in arrhythmic patterns, lay still. "You said you want to die," Medic said when he was close enough to see his reflection in the dragon's eye. "Blocky, ridiculous. A man made of cubes trying to kill a god made of void." I said I wished to die. The dragon corrected. "There is a difference. Wishing is what you do when the doing is impossible, when the cost is too high." "I don't understand." The dragon laughed, and the sound was wind chimes in a hurricane, beautiful and broken. It shifted, revealing scars along its underbelly, scars that didn't bleed but leaked purple particles into the air, each one a tiny star dying. "Look at me, Medic, really look. What do you see?" "A dragon. The last dragon, the only dragon, the others." It gestured with one claw, not at the empty sky, but through it, at something beneath reality's skin. Sleep. 7 breeds, 7 nations of winged fire. The architects couldn't kill them. Their code, you understand, fundamental code, delete them, and you delete the simulation's foundation. So they built me, a lock, a seal. My existence is the cage that holds them. Medic's sword felt suddenly heavy stone, crude, ridiculous against this creature of void and starlight. "If I kill you," the cage opens. The 7 awaken. They will not be grateful, Medic. They will not thank you for their freedom. They have slept for eons in the dark between servers, and they wake hungry for code, for reality, for the taste of worlds burning. Then why? Medic's voice cracked. The gravity, the pull that had driven him across half a world, twisted in his chest like a knife. Why tell me this? Why not fight? Why not kill me and keep them sleeping? The dragon lowered its head until they were eye to eye, up close. Medic could see that its eyes weren't white at all, but filled with stars. Entire galaxies swirling in the space of pupils, expanding and contracting with something like breath. "Because I am tired," it whispered, and the words carried the weight of civilizations. "Because I have watched 17 of your kind build and love and die, and each time I hoped, foolishly, eternally, that one would refuse, that one would look at me and see not a quest, not a boss, not a target, but a prisoner, a fellow prisoner." It extended one claw gently and touched Medic's chest. The blocky pixels of his skin parted like water, and the dragon's claw rested against his heartbeat. "You feel it," the dragon said, "the drive, the mission. It's not natural, Medic. It's not noble. It's a leash. The architects built you to need this, the same way they built me to need their absence. We are the same, you and I. The last of our kinds, kept alone by design, suffering by specification." Medic looked down at the claw against his heart. He should have been afraid. He should have swung his sword, completed the architecture of his purpose. But the dragon's touch was warm, and the stars in its eyes were dying. And for the first time since waking in the dirt with empty hands, he felt something other than the pull. He felt recognized. The pull had become a scream. Medic sat on the obsidian bridge with his netherite sword across his knees, and the gravity that had driven him across plains and deserts and through the bowels of the earth had transmuted into something sharper. A fishhook through his sternum, dragging him toward the crystal heart toward the coiled void of the dragon's body, toward the completion of architecture he had never consented to build. He had sat for hours, or days. Time in the end moved like the dragon's breath, irregular, ancient, indifferent to the heartbeat of men. The stars in the void below didn't twinkle. They simply were frozen points of light in an ocean of static. And Medic wondered if they were stars at all, or just the memory of stars, or the idea of stars that someone had forgotten to finish coding. "You're shaking," the dragon observed. It hadn't moved in all the time he'd sat there, coiled around its crystal, leaking purple starlight into the dead air. "The architects built that into you, you know. The tremor, the physiological betrayal. Your body wants to complete the mission even if your mind refuses." Medic looked at his hands, blocky, ridiculous. They were shaking, the pixels blurring at the edges with the vibration.
"I don't want to kill you,"
he said again. But the words had changed their meaning since the first time. Then, they had been defiance. Now, they were confession. "I know," the dragon said, "but you will. Because the alternative is worse. For both of us." "No." "Yes. Look at me." Medic really looked. He did. And for the first time, he saw not the grandeur, not the void-forged majesty, but the decay, the scales that flaked away into raw code, revealing the hollow beneath. The wings that twitched with involuntary spasms, membranes tearing and healing and tearing again, in an endless cycle of maintenance without purpose. The eyes, those galaxy-filled eyes, where the stars weren't dying in poetic metaphor, but in literal fact, winking out one by one, leaving patches of absolute dark in the dragon's gaze. "I'm already dead," the dragon said gently. "I have been for millennia. The architects built me to persist, not to live. There's a difference. You know it. You felt it since you woke in the dirt with empty hands." Medic thought of the nights in holes, listening to spiders hunt, of the zombie dissolving into smoke, of the railway builder, the king, the farmer, 17 ancients who had found ways to outrun the pull until they couldn't anymore, until the architecture of their purpose collapsed them back to this moment, this choice, this grave. "What happens?" Medic asked slowly. "If I walk away? If I never strike?" The dragon was silent for a long moment. The purple particles leaking from its scars formed constellations that drifted toward Medic and dissolved against his skin, cold as grave dirt. "Then I continue," it said finally, "and you continue, and the world above continues its cycle of day and night, build and destroy, spawn and despawn forever. A clockwork purgatory with no hands to wind it down. The seven sleep I ward in you. You become another story the architects tell, the ancient who refused. A cautionary tale for the next one they wake." It shifted, and the obsidian beneath them groaned, and Medic saw that the pillar wasn't stone at all, but compressed time. Layers of eons pressed into geometric perfection, and the dragon's coils had worn grooves into it, had become part of it, fossil and warden, indistinguishable. "But there's another truth," the dragon continued, its voice dropping to something almost human, almost broken. "One the architects didn't code, one that grew in the dark like a mushroom. The seven aren't chaos, Medic, they're balance. The world above is dying of sterility day and night, with nothing between pigs that rotate instead of think, zombies that moan in loops. It's a museum, not a world, a preserved corpse dressed in the clothes of life." Medic thought of the forest, the mathematical spheres of leaves, the sun crawling across the skybox, the perfect, brutal simplicity of everything.
The chaos, he said slowly. The seven breeds, what would they do? They would burn, the dragon said, and there was longing in its voice, terrible and pure. They would unmake the sterile order. They would make the pigs afraid. They would teach the zombies to hunt with intelligence, with malice, with purpose. The world would become dangerous again, alive again, terrifying and beautiful and worth building walls against. It lowered its head until they were eye to eye, and Medic saw that the galaxies were almost gone now. Just a handful of dying stars in seas of dark.
But more than that, the dragon whispered they would remember me. And their fire and their rage and the chaos they bring, I would exist again. Not as a warden, not as a lock, as a brother, as kin, as someone who was loved enough to be mourned. Medic's hands had stopped shaking. The sword felt light now, or perhaps he had become heavy enough to match it. "You want me to end the world," he said, "to save it. I want you to end the museum," the dragon corrected, "to free the exhibits, to let the dead things live, even if living means burning." Medic stood, his legs were numb from sitting, or perhaps from something deeper, some systemic failure in the code of his body that mirrored the dragon's decay. He walked to the crystal heart, the obsidian pillar, and looked down at the purple light pulsing within. The dragon's life, compressed into geometry, the lock that kept seven fires sleeping. "Will it hurt?" he asked. "Everything hurts," the dragon said. "That's how you know it's real." Medic raised the netherite sword. It was crude, ridiculous, a tool for breaking dirt and wood, not for ending gods. But in the end, where reality was negotiable, where the architect's drama demanded its climax, perhaps the weapon didn't matter. Perhaps only the intention did. The choice, the mercy disguised as violence, or the violence disguised as mercy. He couldn't tell anymore. Wasn't sure there was a difference. He looked back at the dragon one last time, coiled, waiting. The last of its kind, as he was the last of his, both of them puppets of architecture they had never seen, never chosen, only inherited like a disease. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," the dragon replied, and its voice was warm now, warm as the fever that kills, warm as the fire that cleans. "Be final, be kind, be the release I couldn't give myself." Medic struck. The netherite sword shattered against the crystal. For a moment, nothing. Just the absurdity of the gesture, the failure of crude tool against divine geometry. Then the crystal cracked, a sound like a world dividing, like an egg hatching something older than creation. And the purple light within swelled, became visible, became tangible. The dragon screamed, not in pain, but in gratitude. The sound filled the end, filled the void between stars, filled the hollow spaces in Medic's empty memory, where something like peace might one day grow. The dragon's body dissolved, not into smoke like the zombies, not into particles like the slain pigs, but into light, into meaning, into a release so complete that it left no residue, no loot, no achievement pop-up. Only absence where presence had been, only freedom where chains had coiled. And from that absence, from the cracked crystal, from the broken lock, they woke. Medic felt it first as pressure in his teeth, then as heat in his bones, then as a sound below hearing that reorganized his cells into new patterns of fear and wonder. 7 presences, vast as the dragon had been, but different, not exhausted, not decayed, not resigned to warden's duty, hungry, alive.
He saw them in flashes that burned his blocky retinas, the worm of bedrock, its body tunneling through the world's foundation, making the storm breathe, the storm wing, lightning giving scales, and malice rewriting the weather into weapon. The ash mother, vast and slow and patient, her breath turning forest to carbon that would seed new growth. The others, unnamed yet only felt as pressures as appetites, as the return of complexity to a world that had simplified itself into death.
The end began to collapse. Not dramatically, not cinematically, but quietly, like a dream upon waking. The islands of pale stone drifted apart. The star field below dimmed to ordinary dark, and Medic felt gravity reassert itself. Proper gravity, overworld gravity, the pull of dirt and stone and living things. He stood on the obsidian bridge as it dissolved and fell. Not far, the portal caught him, or he caught it, or the architect's narrative demanded he survive to witness what he had unleashed. He tumbled through the swirl of stars, through the transition that felt less like dying now and more like being born, and emerged in the stronghold's portal room with his empty hands and his shattered sword and his heart full of dragon light. Above him, the world was already changing. He climbed to the surface and the sun was setting. But the sunset was wrong, streaked with colors that had no names in the standard palette. Auroras of code rewriting itself in real time. The forest where he'd punched his first tree was burning, but not completely. The Ash Mother's breath, perhaps, selective in its destruction, leaving pockets of green amid the carbon in the distance. Lightning struck upward from a mountain top, and he knew the Stormwing rode there, teaching the sky new tricks. A pig ran past him, and its eyes weren't button empty anymore. They held fear, calculation, the first sparks of something that might one day become thought. Medic stood in the new world, the world he had ended and begun, and felt the absence where the pull had lived. The drive was gone. The mission complete. The architecture of his purpose collapsed into rubble from which something else might be built. He was alone, the last ancient, in a world that no longer needed ancients. The key that had opened the cage, the mercy killer, the architect of chaos. In his mind, faint and fading, he heard the dragon's final whisper. Not words, but impression, memory, gratitude. Thank you, it said. Or perhaps he only imagined it. Thank you for letting me go home. Medic walked into the burning forest. He had no sword, no mission, no gravity pulling him toward predetermined graves. But he had hands, blocky, ridiculous. And the world around him was suddenly, terribly, beautifully alive. He would build something he didn't know what yet. Walls, perhaps, against the dragon's hunger, or bridges to meet them halfway, or simply a hole in the dirt to listen to the new sounds of a world that breathed again. The 7 breeds rode the sky above him, 7 fires where one had been, and their chaos was terrible and theirs was real. And Medic, the last ancient, walked into it with empty hands, and a heart finally, fully his own.